Bamfordrose and another forum chat. This week we're going to talk about a subject I quite often see. There'll be a post somewhere on a forum saying, where's the cheapest place to service my Aston? I always do think that's totally the wrong question. Do you really want the cheapest place servicing your Aston? I can understand the spirit in which the post was made, but it's not the right viewpoint. Also, hand in hand with figuring out the cheapest place to service your Aston is the question that keeps arising, come on, you don't need to keep changing brake fluid every year. And some people say yes, some people say no, and I just wanted to add a bit of data to the subject. So brake fluid is hygroscopic, which means it absorbs water over time. And we can pop up a graph here which shows when the brake fluid was new and when the brake fluid has absorbed water, what that water ingress content means in terms of how it will affect the performance of the fluid. And this is what's known as a dry boiling point and a wet boiling point. So the dry boiling point is when the brake fluid is brand new out of the bottle, and there's in the spec, depending on the grade of the fluid, there's a figure for that. The better the fluid, the higher the temperature. Then the wet boiling point is when the brake fluid has absorbed a certain percentage, it's 3.7% water, and it's a measurement of how each fluid behaves at that level of water ingress. And as water is, the percentage by volume of water increases, the boiling point obviously comes down. And you can see on this graph here that the lower grade fluids, as soon as they hit 8%, the boiling point of the fluid is practically the same as water. Obviously in the Aston we use Castrol Super.4, and already this is a really high spec brake fluid. We've got a dry boiling point of 260 degrees and a wet boiling point after it's increased the percentage of volume by water of 185 degrees. In the race cars we use a synthetic fluid, and that's Castrol SRF, and that has 300 degrees dry boiling point with 270 degrees wet. So after that fluid has absorbed water, the reduced boiling point is still better than the fresh out of the bottle Castrol React Super.4. Some customers have bought some of their own brake fluid in, thinking that it's better. There's been a Motul 660 fluid that we've had in. It's got an extremely good dry boiling point, 328 degrees. Its wet is 204, so it's not that far off the Castrol React Super.4. So just a word of caution there when you're selecting a brake fluid which you think is better than the Castrol React Super.4 as standard, just check out the dry and wet boiling points to see that it actually is better fluid. So there is a naming numbering convention. Dot 3.4 and dot 5.1 are all glycol based. Dot 5.0 is synthetic, and you cannot mix them. So if you want to change from a glycol to a synthetic, you have to flush out. It's probably going to take 2 litres to do that properly. So that's one part of this forum chat, different brake fluids and why you might change them. So the next is coming on to servicing. So every year, every service here, we do what we call a caliper bleed. where there's the inner bleed nipple, outer bleed nipple, and we do about 5-7 pumps on each bleed nipple. And regardless of whether the fluid needed changing, then when the customer drives away after service, that caliper bleed gives that just service feel. You know, the brake pedal is going to feel a little bit more sharper. So I don't think any garage out there would annually completely flush out from master cylinder through to the ABS unit, through to each caliper, completely flush out all of the fluid. I think a brake fluid service, or what they do at point of service, is what we would call a caliper bleed. And certainly by the time you've done, you know, 7 or so pumps on the inner and outer bleed nipple on all 4 corners, you're going to have flushed through from the ABS unit down into the through the calipers. So the fluid in the master cylinder, it's brake fluid, it's hygroscopic, it's going to be absorbing some water. The only side effect of that is that it's going to reduce its boiling point. Now, try and do some research on the web. As soon as you open a brake bottle, how quickly does that industry standard water by volume absorption level take to ingress? And it's quite difficult to find that out. There's some places that say it happens super fast, like within a month or something like that. And other places that say typically it's 2 years. And it's difficult to find that out. But for those people that are thinking at service it's just completely unnecessary spend to flush out and renew the brake fluid, they say, I don't think that happens, it's just a caliper bleed. And that takes minutes, and it makes your brake pedal feel nice and fresh after each service. But go back to the start and the whole philosophy of asking this question to drive down the price of servicing. Well, you don't really want to thrift that minor brake caliper bleed out of it, not least because every year you're then undoing your bleed nipples, and it means that they shouldn't really seize. You know, if you left your bleed nipples without touching them for a couple of years, you're probably going to find that the caliper, it's going to seize in the caliper, then you're going to have to remove the caliper, and it's going to be a bit of a tricky engineering job. Not impossible to machine out the bleed nipple, and then any plan of not touching your brake calipers because you thought you were saving money is just completely blown out the water, because it's going to cost way more to rework the caliper. So, you know, I'd just let garages get on with what they know best, which is how to make the car feel like it's just been serviced, everything's nice and fresh. And if you think that a brake caliper, a brake bleed at every annual service is over the top, I mean, we could get asked not to do it. It wouldn't change the price of the service, and we'd still do it anyway, because we know that it's going to make the car have that just service feel. So I hope that's given a little bit of data behind what's happening to the brake fluid, and see you in the next video.